Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Frank Mularcik, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to get some stock data using Python and some various methods that I use and different resources that I use, and just walking you guys through some examples as well, just to show the different types of data you can get and how the data is presented and how you can filter it down to exactly what you need. So within Python, the main package or module that I use just for stock data is called Yahoo Fin, and I'll definitely leave the link to this website because it's basically all the documentation. It's just a Python package that this guy created. It has a bunch of awesome functionalities, and I've probably only scraped the surface with what I do, but basically as you can see here, let me show you. It says the package basically has three modules, which are stock info, options, and news. And I've really only used the stock info one, which that's definitely where most of the functionality is. But as you can see, there's just all these methods here that you can use, and there's explanations below for all of them. And basically, even within all these methods, oftentimes they return a ton of different data, so it's super helpful. So if we want to just look at like get data, for example, we click on that and it brings us to this, and it shows us the inputs you need, and then it talks about what it does, and etc., and you can run it and see what it produces. So it's super helpful, and so now we're just going to look at some examples that I came up with to sort of show some different functions that I found useful myself. Alright, so the first statement we have is just to import Yahoo_Fin, and then we want the stock info module. That's what we're going to be talking about, and that's what I use. So we're just going to put the dot operator stock_info, and then we're going to just call it SI for easier use. And then we're just going to create a ticker variable, which you don't have to do, but you can just use that for simplicity, and then you can change it around whenever you want, or you can dynamically somehow decide what the ticker should be. So the first one that's useful here is this function here, get live price, which just gets the current price, and when the market is open, it will get you the live price, and then you just pass the ticker in here, and then I think for most of the stuff it doesn't return it as a float, it returns it as a string, for example. So sometimes you have to convert it to a float just with the float function, and then it returns a bunch of decimals, so I just added the round function on as well. So if we just run that, you can see down here that we get 130.21 for the current price of Apple. Next up, we're going to look at this one here, which is called get quote table, and that just gets you a table with a bunch of information. So we're going to assign that to a variable called table and then print that out, and it basically returns a dictionary here, as you can see. So the first key is 1 year target estimate, and then that is the value there is 158, and then the second key is 52-week range, and the value there is 75 to 145. So there's a lot of different things you can do. Obviously you can just print out some specific values, or obviously you could assign those to variables. So we just call the table variable, and then in the brackets we call the key we want, so ex dividend date and market cap. And if we run that again, we'll see that those values are pulled directly from our dictionary here. So it says our ex dividend date is May 7th, and where is that listed? Right here, ex dividend date May 7th, and then the market cap is also listed right here as 2.173 trillion, and it lists that out here at the bottom as well. And then another thing you can do is it does list the 52-week range. So for example, if we just printed the 52-week range, it's not going to be very helpful, because it's going to show it in the format that is shown here, which as you can see is 75 to 145, and that's with a little dash in there. So we want to get rid of that dash and maybe get the low value separate and the high value separate. So what we can do is we can use the split function, and that basically splits it based on, usually it splits it based on a space, but we can pass the dash in here as that character that it wants to split basically the string up into. So once we do that, this range 52, this variable is going to be a array that has, or a list rather, that has two different values in it that are what was split from that string. So now we have 75.05 and 145.09 in two separate values in this array. And as you can see, there's little white spaces here, so we'll deal with that later as well with the strip function, because that strips all white space. So then for the next one, we can just create two variables, low and high, and these are going to actually have the 52-week low and the 52-week high. So if we just take our list and then we look at the zeroth index, and then we're also going to strip that of white space using the strip function, and then same thing for the high, looking at the first index, and then we can print those out and see that those are separate values within those variables. And then it looks like that ran real quick, and we can see we still have these this list printed out, and then we have these separate values printed as well. And I think these might be strings right now, so if you wanted to do something with them, like do calculations or something, to calculate maybe the difference between the 52-week high and the 52-week low, you would have to assign it to a float or convert it to a float. So I did that here and just reassigned the variables to be a float, and then we can print out, for example, the difference between the high and low. And we can see, I'll show you in a second, that if we try to do that before we reassign it, so it says down here that the difference between the high and low was 70, which is about right. And I'll show you as well that if we try to do this before we reassign it, then it's actually going to give us an error, because it's basically saying we can't do addition and subtraction on a strings, right? So it says unsupported operand types for string. So that's why we have to convert it to a float. So all that stuff was just dealing with the get quote table function, and then the next one we're going to look at is the get stats valuation, and this can give you like some PE ratios and some of that stuff. So if we just pass in the ticker and then print that out, we'll get this little table here. And then you can see here, yeah, we got this little table, and it's basically in a data frame. So we're going to have to deal with that, because data frames are sometimes a little bit tricky to work with. So we got the market cap, the enterprise value, trailing PE, forward PE, some other stuff, and the way they list it is based on a quarter by quarter basis and then the current value. So they list the last few quarters in these columns to the right, and then the most current date basically is in this first column, but it's really the second column, because the first column is these titles, and then the indexes are listed on the left here, and then the column names are listed on the top. So what we need to do is we need to sort of dynamically get this index name so that we can reference this column, because every time you look at this, it's going to be different, because when I look at this on Monday, May 10th, it's going to be as of May 10th, so that name is going to be different, so we need to dynamically access that. So what we do is we can get we can just make this a list, and if we just make the valuation variable here a list, that basically just gives us a list of the column names. Down here we'll see that, yeah, so now we just have a list of the column names, and so you can see the one we want is the second one in this list here, and that is the first index in a list. So we can just get that index, and then basically what we can do is we can pass that index as a reference for the data frame, just to access a value. So that's what we did right here, and then for the second reference to access the row, we're just going to pass 3, because if I want to look at the forward PE, that is the row that we want to look at based on these indexes on the left. And then we run all of that, we should get the forward PE printed out at the bottom, which for Apple it looks at the time is 26.32. So yeah, we got that forward PE printed out right here at the bottom, 26.32, and we also printed out that first index, which is the index that we want to, or the first column name, which is the first index in the list, but that's the column that we want to access right here. And then another method that's super useful is just the get stats method. So if we print that out, we're going to get another data frame with a bunch more information. Oops, I did not print it, I just assigned it to that variable. So if we print it out, we get a bunch more information in a nice little data frame here. So there's a bunch of info like beta, 52-week change, and again, there's the high and low, 52-week high and low here. So maybe that's a better option than the previous option I listed, but I was just using that as an example. They have the moving averages, which are cool. They have some dividend information like the dividend amount and dividend yield, the payout ratio, which I think is awesome because not many sources have the payout ratio. Then they have the dividend dates and ex-dividend dates, and I believe that these are actually slightly wrong. The dividend dates and ex-dividend dates, I found usually they're 1 day wrong. So I think Apple's ex-dividend date was actually May 7th, and the payout date is probably May 13th, a day after. So you have to be careful there, and basically I just like check your data when you're first looking at it to verify that it's all correct, so you can trust this source. And I know that just from experience, these days are always 1 day off. And so basically what you have to do is you have to create a date time variable with that date, and then basically add 1 to it so you can get the correct date. But back to this, basically we can just get any of this information the same way we did before, because the column name that we want is going to be value, and then we can just use these indexes on the left to get whatever value we want. So for example, this first one here, we're going to print stats, and then we're looking at the value column and then row 19. So we look here, row 19, that's the forward annual dividend rate, which is 88 cents. And then this one here that we're looking at is the same value column, and then row 24, which we're looking here is the payout ratio. So I think that's awesome that they include the payout ratio, because I would say not many sources do. So if we run that, we get right here at the bottom 88 cents and 18.34%, which is Apple's payout ratio. And the payout ratios normally are never going to agree exactly from source to source, but they're generally close. So I think I looked at Seeking Alpha earlier, and it said Apple's payout ratio is maybe 17%. So in this case, it says 18%, and it's pretty similar. So I think for most people, that's probably good enough for what they need. So I know there's definitely a lot of other places you can get stock data with Python. There's a lot of other packages, but for me, this is the one I've used the most, and this is the one that has worked for me. So that's just what I wanted to show with you guys. And I've also done a video in the past on how to use the GSpread module to basically import this stock data that you have gathered using these Yahoo Finance modules and import them into a Google Sheet. So I'll leave a link right up here if you want to check that out, and I'll leave a link in the description below. And I want to thank you guys for watching the video. I really appreciate all the support, and I will see you guys in the next one.